There's a dangerous myth circulating through modern culture, a myth that tells women to accommodate endlessly, to tolerate indefinitely, to give and give until there's nothing left but the ghost of who they once were. The narrative whispers that love is sacrifice, that patience will eventually be rewarded, and that a good woman knows how to wait. But here's a truth that's far less palatable and yet far more liberating. What you tolerate, you endorse, and what you endorse, you become complicit in. If you don't define your standards, the world, and more specifically your partner, will define them for you, and you will not like the result. Women must wake up to the fact that love at its core is not just about giving, it's also about choosing wisely what to expect, what to require, and what to never settle without. To demand, not with aggression, but with unwavering clarity, the respect that reflects your worth. You don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate, and what you allow will continue. So today, let's confront the uncomfortable. Let's redefine strength, not as stoic suffering, but as bold expectation. These are the 7 things every woman must demand, not request, in a relationship, because dignity isn't optional. It's the starting point. In the architecture of intimacy, emotional honesty is the foundation upon which everything else is built. Not surface-level transparency, not convenient partial truths, but raw, unfiltered honesty that reveals the soul of a man, not just what he feels, but what he fears, what he resents, what he longs for, and what he's unwilling to confront in himself. And a woman must demand that kind of truth. Why? Because without it, the relationship is a play. 2 people acting, pretending, putting on masks they think the other wants to see. And you can only wear a mask for so long before it suffocates your real identity. Emotional honesty is not merely a romantic ideal. It is a psychological necessity, because if a woman is trying to build something long-lasting, something with depth and direction, she cannot do it on a foundation of omission, denial, or false persona. You cannot afford to fall in love with someone's potential while ignoring their patterns. A man who cannot be honest with himself cannot be honest with you, and that fact alone should not be rationalized away. Far too often, women sense emotional dishonesty before they can name it. That's the brilliance and the burden of feminine intuition. It knows. You can feel when someone is hiding behind silence, behind ambiguity, behind the defensive smokescreens of, "I don't want to talk about it," or "That's just how I am." These are not reflections of emotional depth. These are shields against intimacy. They are quiet denials of vulnerability, and they are slow poisons to trust. The irony is that many women, in their effort to preserve the relationship, will ignore their inner alarm bells. They'll rationalize, maybe he's just not good at expressing himself, or he didn't mean to lie, he was just afraid. And while those statements may be true, they are not an excuse. Understanding why someone is dishonest does not make the dishonesty safe. Compassion without boundaries becomes a liability, not a virtue. When you allow emotional dishonesty to take root in your relationship, you are not avoiding conflict, you are delaying collapse. The conversations you avoid become the resentments you carry, and the more you carry, the more you bend until your spirit breaks under the weight of what was never said. Emotional dishonesty teaches a woman to second-guess her own mind. It forces her to read between the lines constantly, to analyze tones and silences, to interpret actions that never align with words. That is not intimacy. That is psychological exhaustion. So demand truth, not as a favor, but as a requirement, not in moments of crisis only, but as a daily ethic. Emotional honesty means you're willing to confront the uncomfortable. You're willing to say, this is what I need, this is how I feel, and this is what I will not ignore. A man who cannot meet you there is not a bad man. He's just not ready for the depth you are offering. And if you silence your need for truth in order to keep him, you will lose yourself while trying to hold on to someone who's not even being real with you. Love without consistency is just chaos dressed up in charm. One day he's attentive, responsive, and affectionate. He calls you beautiful, makes plans, and speaks of the future with conviction. The next, he's withdrawn, distracted, maybe even cold. He pulls away without explanation, stops responding, changes his tone, and suddenly you're left questioning everything: your worth, your words, your reality. And the problem is, the inconsistency doesn't happen all at once. It slips in slowly, a missed call here, a forgotten promise there, a change in demeanor that's never addressed. And if you're not careful, you'll spend weeks, months, even years stuck in a loop where you're holding on to moments of connection as proof of love while ignoring the growing void in between them. This is how inconsistency becomes emotional conditioning. You begin to chase the good days, you work harder, speak softer, try to be better in the hopes that maybe, just maybe, he'll go back to how he was in the beginning. You start walking on eggshells, hoping to avoid the triggers that push him away. But what you're really doing is abandoning yourself in hopes of securing someone else's unstable affection, and it's never sustainable. Because when you love someone who lacks consistency, you end up in a relationship that feels like punishment mixed with reward. And that's not love. That's emotional roulette. Consistency is not about being perfect. It's not about never having a bad day. It's about predictability and character. It's about knowing that if someone says they'll be there, they will. That if they love you on Monday, they won't emotionally disappear by Thursday. It's the difference between security and suspicion. When someone is consistent, you don't have to interpret every silence. You don't have to decode every mood swing or analyze why their texts suddenly feel colder. You can simply be. And in that stillness, real intimacy can grow. A woman must learn that inconsistency is not mysterious. It is not deep. It is not a sign of emotional complexity. It is often a symptom of immaturity, distraction, or emotional manipulation. People who keep you guessing are often people who are avoiding responsibility because as long as you're confused, they don't have to be accountable. They can always say, "That's not what I meant," or "You're being dramatic," or "I've just been busy." And you begin to internalize those excuses as valid, even when they repeatedly violate your emotional security. So demand consistency. Demand a love that shows up every day, not perfectly, but intentionally. A man who respects you will not keep you in a state of confusion. He will bring clarity through his actions, not just his words. And if someone's pattern is unpredictability, that is the message. Don't translate instability into mystery. Don't interpret hot and cold behavior as intensity. If it makes you anxious more than it brings you peace, it's not love. It's uncertainty, and you deserve better than a relationship built on guesswork. Far too many women are taught, directly or indirectly, that their worth lies in how agreeable, accommodating, or understanding they can be, that to maintain peace, they must silence themselves, that to avoid conflict, they must compromise not just their preferences but their principles, and so they begin to feel guilty for having boundaries. They apologize for saying no, they feel selfish for needing space. They shrink their needs into whispers so they don't upset the fragile ego of a man who was never taught to handle a woman with standards. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not signs of selfishness. They are declarations of self-worth. And any relationship that cannot honor a woman's boundaries is not a relationship. It's a power imbalance dressed up as partnership. A boundary is not a threat. It is a truth. It says, this is where I end and you begin. This is what I will accept and this is what I will not. And it is not a boundary if it's constantly bent to accommodate someone else's discomfort. It is not a boundary if it can be guilted, ignored, or pushed aside when inconvenient. The strength of your boundary lies not in how loud you announce it, but in how firmly you enforce it. And many women fall into the trap of setting boundaries but not holding them. They say, I won't tolerate this, but when it happens again, they rationalize it. They say this crosses a line, but they redraw the line every time he steps over it. What begins as a standard becomes a negotiation and eventually a compromise that erodes their sense of identity. The way a man responds to your boundary reveals his level of emotional maturity. If he reacts with anger, manipulation, or guilt, he is not protecting love. He is protecting control. He sees your boundary as rejection because he was never taught that love and limits can coexist. A healthy man will not see your boundary as a punishment. He will see it as a map, a way to understand you better, to protect what matters to you, to meet you where you are. He will adjust, not because he's being controlled, but because he values the relationship enough to evolve. And let's be clear, demanding respect for your boundaries doesn't mean you build walls so high no one can reach you. It means you communicate clearly and enforce fairly. You don't make rules in anger. You make decisions from clarity. You teach people how to love you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. And if a man continues to cross your boundaries, it's no longer about him misunderstanding you. It's about him refusing to honor you. You should never feel guilty for protecting your peace. Never feel ashamed for needing respect. Your boundaries are not problems to solve. They are prerequisites for real love. And if someone cannot handle your boundaries, then they were never ready for your love in the first place. Time is the most valuable currency you possess, and how someone treats your time is a direct reflection of how they value you. A woman must demand intentionality, not just in words, but in actions. Too often, relationships begin in a fog of excitement and potential, but without a clear direction. That fog eventually turns into confusion. You find yourself in situationships, endless talking stages, or casual dynamics where he doesn't want to label things or needs more time to figure himself out. And meanwhile, you're investing energy, emotions, and months of your life waiting for someone to make up their mind. That is not love evolving. It's love evading accountability. Intentionality is not just about making grand gestures or talking about the future when it's convenient. It's about clarity. It's about alignment. A man who is intentional shows up with purpose. He doesn't leave you guessing. He communicates not to keep you emotionally invested while he decides if you're good enough, but to build something mutual, grounded, and real. He initiates plans, follows through, and demonstrates through his effort that he sees you not as an option, but as a priority. And when a man lacks intentionality, the relationship becomes a waiting room. You sit there hoping for change while he keeps the door open for something better, different, or easier. The danger of staying with someone who isn't intentional is that it slowly teaches you to lower your expectations. You begin to celebrate breadcrumbs. At least he texted back. At least he came over. At least he didn't cancel this time. But at least is a form of settling. And over time, you forget what it feels like to be pursued with clarity and respect. You become accustomed to uncertainty. You convince yourself that if you're patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, he'll finally become the man you need. But love isn't a game of emotional endurance. If someone genuinely wants to be with you, they will not make you question it. A man who is ready will not need convincing. He will not be afraid to define the relationship. He will not string you along with vague promises or delayed commitments. He will not wait until you walk away to suddenly recognize your value. And most importantly, he will not need to lose you to understand your worth. That is the measure of intentionality. It's not perfection. It's presence. It's direction. It's the ability to say, I know what I want, and I choose you, not just today, but consistently. So don't just listen to what he says when he's comfortable. Watch what he does when clarity is required. Demand direction, demand intention. Your heart is not a placeholder. Your time is not disposable. You are not an emotional convenience for someone still exploring their options. You deserve to be chosen with certainty, loved with purpose, and pursued with clarity. Anything less is not confusion. It's avoidance disguised as affection. And you have every right to walk away from that. Respect is not something you earn once and never have to maintain. It's something that must be continuously nurtured, reinforced, and reciprocated. A woman must demand respect as a non-negotiable standard, not a conditional reward. Because without respect, there is no foundation for love. Only control, manipulation, or obligation. And here's the truth. If a man loves you but does not respect you, his love will eventually feel like a cage. It will come with rules, silences, guilt trips, or dominance. It will expect your compliance instead of honoring your autonomy. And that is not love. That is power masquerading as affection. Respect means he listens to you, not just hears you, but listens with the intention to understand, not just to respond or dismiss. It means your opinions, your voice, your experiences are not minimized or brushed off with condescension. It means you're not being interrupted when you speak, talked down to when you express emotion, or blamed for having boundaries. Disrespect doesn't always scream. It often whispers in subtle dismissals, sarcastic jabs, or constant defensiveness. And too many women become so accustomed to these microaggressions that they begin to normalize them. They start saying, "That's just how he is," or "he didn't mean it like that," all while losing their sense of emotional safety in the process. Respect also shows up in how a man treats your time, your values, your body, and your dreams. If he constantly reschedules on you, ignores your needs, or pressures you into things you're not ready for, those are all red flags of disrespect, regardless of how kind he is in other areas. You cannot afford to excuse behavior that violates your sense of dignity, because the moment you tolerate disrespect, you teach him how to treat you. You condition him to believe that you will stay even when your worth is being diminished. And over time, your tolerance becomes his permission. A man who respects you will not just avoid hurting you, he will actively protect your dignity. He will think before he speaks, not out of fear, but out of regard for your emotional safety. He will not mock your sensitivities or dismiss your perspectives. Instead, he'll be curious about what matters to you and intentional about making space for your voice. That kind of man doesn't just want to be loved, he wants to be worthy of your love. And that's the standard every woman should hold, not out of entitlement, but out of self-respect. Don't wait until disrespect escalates into something unbearable before drawing the line. Catch it early. Call it out when it's small. Because if you silence yourself every time he crosses a line, those lines will vanish, and you'll find yourself in a relationship where you no longer recognize who you are. Respect should be present from the beginning and consistent throughout. It should not have to be begged for, negotiated, or earned through suffering. You deserve a love that honors you, not one that erodes you. Support is not a bonus in a relationship. It is a fundamental necessity. A woman must demand support in the fullest sense, not just during crises or when things fall apart, but in the daily unfolding of her life. Emotional, mental, spiritual, and practical support. Because love that does not uplift, strengthen, or empower is not love. It's companionship without substance. Too many women are conditioned to be the emotional anchors in their relationships while silently drowning themselves. They are expected to be the nurturers, the motivators, the caregivers, the counselors, without ever being poured into in return. That imbalance is not romantic. It's exhaustion masquerading as devotion. Support means being seen, truly seen. It means having a partner who doesn't just know what you do, but understands why you do it. Someone who pays attention to your goals, your values, your ambitions, and stands behind them. Not someone who competes with you, belittles your dreams, or becomes emotionally distant when your light starts to shine. Because a man who is intimidated by your strength is not equipped to hold space for your evolution. Your growth should never threaten him. It should inspire him. And if it doesn't, he is not a safe place for your soul to expand. Support is also quiet. It's in the simple, consistent acts, checking in on your emotional state, celebrating your wins, offering a listening ear when you're overwhelmed, and showing up without being asked. It's not about grand gestures. It's about steady presence. A man who supports you doesn't have to agree with every step you take, but he should respect your process. He should speak life into your efforts and remind you of your value when the world tries to make you forget it. A woman should never have to carry both her burden and his, while also carrying the weight of being unseen. Many women fall into relationships where they are the only ones growing, the only ones evolving, the only ones showing up with consistency and care. They become the emotional infrastructure for someone who gives just enough to keep them from walking away. That dynamic isn't sustainable. Eventually, the one who gives without receiving becomes depleted, and depletion breeds resentment, even if it's unspoken. A healthy relationship is a place where both people are actively invested in each other's becoming, where your partner doesn't just watch you from the sidelines, but walks beside you, steady and present. A supportive man will ask how your day was and actually care about the answer. He'll encourage you to pursue your goals, not guilt you for having them. He'll hold space for your struggles, not make you feel weak for expressing them. And most importantly, he will remind you by word and by action that you are not alone, that your dreams are not too big, that your needs are not too much. You are not meant to fight for love and carry it alone. True love meets you where you are and helps lift you to where you're going. Trust is the backbone of every meaningful relationship. Without it, love becomes anxiety, communication becomes suspicion, and closeness becomes emotional volatility. A woman must demand trust. Not just the ability to believe in her partner's faithfulness, but the ability to feel safe, seen, and secure in his presence. Trust is not simply about not cheating. It's about emotional reliability, psychological safety, and the freedom to be vulnerable without fear of manipulation or judgment. If you are constantly second-guessing a man's intentions, rereading his words to decode hidden meanings, or walking on emotional eggshells, you are not in a relationship rooted in trust. You're in one rooted in uncertainty, and no matter how passionate it may feel, that's a slow path to emotional depletion. Trust means you don't have to monitor his behavior like a detective. You don't have to wonder who he's texting, why he's distant, or whether he's telling the whole truth. A trustworthy man lives in such a way that your nervous system doesn't have to be on high alert. He's transparent, not defensive. He communicates clearly, not strategically. He admits when he's wrong, not because he's weak, but because he values the integrity of the relationship more than the illusion of being right. That's real strength. For trust to exist, there must be emotional honesty. You cannot build trust with someone who hides their inner world. If a man can't talk about what's really going on inside, his fears, his frustrations, his desires, then he will always operate from behind a mask. And the moment something feels off, instead of addressing it, he will shut down or deflect, making you question your own